welcome to another MEAPA video. As a pioneering brand, MEAPA is a global training company that teaches individuals and organizations how to think more effectively in order to succeed in the world's most competitive century. This video takes a specific look at PATH and introduces the viewer to our personal assessment of traits and habits. MEAPA's training philosophy is that an entity will only grow as much as its people grow. In order for personal growth to occur, however, one needs to examine carefully their path of getting from point A to point B. And in MEAPA, that path stands for Personal Assessment of Traits and Habits. Now, this personal assessment of traits and habits does not identify strengths and weaknesses. Instead, it looks at frequency of practice. In other words, how frequently does an individual practice specific traits and habits? Do they never do it? Rarely, very rarely, frequently, very frequently, or always? So this personal assessment of traits and habits, again, is not about strengths and weaknesses. It is instead about frequency of practice. Now, there are 20 of these traits and habits. So in this introduction, we're going to just briefly review each of the 20 traits and habits. And then you can review this video and contemplate where you fall in terms of your frequency of each of these 20 traits and habits. Mind you, there's also a workbook that's free online on the MEAPA website if you just click the PATH link on the left side menu. So let's look at the very first trait and habit here. How often are you comfortable at being uncomfortable? Are you never comfortable at being uncomfortable? Are you rarely, very rarely, frequently, very frequently, or always comfortable at being uncomfortable? Now, if you select always for this trait or habit or any of the other traits or habits, please also write down 10 specific examples to demonstrate that you always do that task. And be very careful of that. You know, if you say you always do something, that's what it means. You always do it. So be honest with each of these 20 traits and habits. This is your own personal assessment. So let's go move on to number 2. How often do you create a vision for your life? This is for your personal and professional life. So how often do you create a vision? How often do you believe you create your own life? Do you believe other forces are at work that determine your own life? And how often do you believe you create your own life? How often do you rebound from failure? Do you never rebound from failure? Rarely, very rarely, frequently, very frequently, or always rebound from failure? Again, if you've chosen always, please write down at least 10 distinct times when you rebounded from failure, or more if you have them. Next trait or habit. How often do you practice self-discipline? Again, this goes for your personal and professional lives. How often do you practice self-discipline? How often do you exercise courageous behavior? Now, not every moment of every day requires us to exhibit courageous behavior, but when the times have popped up in our lives, when we needed to exercise courageous behavior, how often did we? How often do you believe in yourself when others do not? Now, this means that you have to admit that others have not believed in you. That's fine. How often do you believe in yourself, or have you believed in yourself, when others have not? How often do you engage in self-promotion? Many people do not like to engage in self-promotion, yet it's a critical trait and habit to practice. How often do you engage in it? How often do you find new resources when trying to solve a problem? Do you just rely on the same old individuals, reports, ideas? Or do you find new resources when trying to solve a problem? And if so, how often do you do that? How often do you persevere at difficult situations? Remember, these are not strengths and weaknesses here. This is just frequency of practice. So if you put down never or rarely, do not view it as a weakness. View it simply as a trait or habit that you have not practiced with any degree of frequency. That's very important. How often do you work towards a specific goal? Again, for both your personal and professional life. Generally speaking, how often do you work towards a specific goal? How often do you prioritize? How often do you collaborate? Do you prefer just to always work by yourself? And if you do collaborate, how often do you collaborate? Again, do not judge. This is not about strengths and weaknesses. It's about frequency of practice. How often do you seek first to understand, then work towards being understood? This is a challenging task for even the most disciplined of individuals. So how often do you seek first to understand, then work towards being understood? Think of all the conversations that you had. When people start telling you their ideas, do you interrupt them? Do you immediately give them your ideas? Or do you ask questions such as, "That's interesting, tell me more. Why do you think like that? How did you arrive at that conclusion? That's very interesting." So how often do you seek first to understand? How often do you engage in self-improvement? And if you say always here, again, write down at least 10 specific examples where you always engage in self-improvement. How often do you discuss ideas? Or would you rather talk about people or events? Or do you enjoy talking about ideas? And if so, how often do you discuss ideas? How often are you comfortable with change, both personally and professionally? How often do you take calculated risk? Again, just like the courageous behavior trait and habit, not every moment of every day requires us to take calculated risk. But when the times do arise in our lives, do we take calculated risk? And if so, how often? How often do you ask yourself empowering questions, such as, instead of, "Oh, why is this happening to me?" do you ask yourself, "Well, what is life trying to teach me at this very moment?" So how often do you ask yourself empowering questions like, "What is life trying to teach me at this very moment?" And how often do you differentiate from others? Do you understand the value of differentiating yourself from others? How often do you do it? There's a whole workbook available if you go to MEAPA.com/path that reviews these 20 traits and habits. And MEAPA wishes you well as you travel down your path of going from point A to point B in your life, examining how you think, not just what you think, and that we wish you very well on your journey in both your personal and professional life. Thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.